A girl thought she rescued a puppy. Cold, scared, and alone behind a dumpster. She brought it home, thinking she finally had something of her own to protect. But weeks later, something isn't right. It doesn't bark. It doesn't act like any dog she's ever seen. And late at night, it stares at her like it knows something. Then, people start asking questions, strange questions, and the girl begins to realize this wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something much bigger and far more dangerous than she ever imagined. What did she really bring home? And why does it feel like it's not the one that needs saving? Before we begin, share a piece of your world in the comments. Your city, your energy. It's a powerful thing, being part of something bigger than ourselves. The autumn wind rustled through the trees behind Kelly's diner as Nellie Granger added the final touches to her sketch. Her worn pencil moved across the paper, capturing the way shadows played across the building's weathered bricks. The 16-year-old tucked a strand of wild auburn hair behind her ear, frowning at her drawing. Something wasn't quite right with the perspective. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her sketchbook as she worked. This quiet spot behind the diner had become her favorite retreat after school. Here, surrounded by nothing but the whisper of leaves and distant kitchen sounds, she could lose herself in her art without anyone bothering her. A faint whimper caught her attention. Nellie lowered her sketchbook, listening intently. There it was again, a soft, pained sound coming from near the dumpster. Setting aside her materials, she crept closer to investigate. "Hello?" she called softly, peering into the shadows beneath the large metal container. "Is someone there?" Two amber eyes gleamed back at her from the darkness. Nellie's heart skipped a beat as she knelt down for a better look. A small creature huddled in the corner, trembling. At first glance, she thought it was a puppy, but something about its appearance seemed off. Its limbs were unusually long and graceful, its body hairless and oddly proportioned. But what struck her most were its eyes, deep, intelligent, and almost human-like in their expression. "Oh, you poor thing," Nellie whispered, her heart aching at how thin and frightened it looked. "Are you hurt?" The creature made no sound, but watched her intently. Nellie slowly reached into her backpack and pulled out half of her uneaten sandwich from lunch. "Here," she said gently, holding out the food. "You must be hungry." After a moment's hesitation, the creature inched forward. Its movements were careful and deliberate, unlike any dog she'd ever seen. It delicately took the offered food, eating with surprising grace despite its obvious hunger. Nellie's artistic eye couldn't help but study its unusual features. The curve of its spine, the elegant arch of its neck, the way its joints seemed to bend in unexpected ways. It was fascinating. Without thinking, she reached for her sketchbook and began to draw. The creature finished eating and, to her surprise, moved closer. It studied her drawing with what seemed like genuine interest, its head tilted curiously. Nellie felt a connection forming, something deeper than simple pity for an injured animal. "You need help," she said quietly, more to herself than the creature. "But the animal shelter wouldn't understand you, would they? You're different." Her grandmother's old barn flashed through her mind. It had stood empty for years, ever since they'd sold the last of the farm equipment. It would make a perfect shelter, at least temporarily. "I have an idea," Nellie told the creature, packing up her supplies. "But you'll have to trust me." As if understanding her words, the creature took a tentative step toward her. Nellie shrugged off her flannel overshirt and carefully wrapped it around the trembling being. To her amazement, it allowed her to lift it, settling into her arms with surprising trust. The walk home took longer than usual, as Nellie stuck to back roads and shortcuts through the woods, avoiding curious eyes. The creature remained perfectly still and silent in her arms, so unlike a normal puppy that it reinforced her growing certainty that this was something entirely different. When they reached the barn, Nellie created a cozy nest using old blankets stored in the loft. The creature explored its new space with careful curiosity while she worked, those remarkable amber eyes taking in everything. "You need a name," Nellie mused, watching it investigate a shaft of sunlight streaming through a crack in the wall. Its patchwork appearance and the way she'd found it inspired her. "How about Scraps?" The creature turned to look at her, and for a moment, Nellie could have sworn she saw understanding in its eyes. She pulled out her sketchbook again, unable to resist capturing its unique form. As she drew, Scraps settled beside her, watching the pencil move across the paper with evident fascination. "Don't worry," she whispered, reaching out to gently stroke its head. "I'll take care of you. Nobody will hurt you here." That evening, after ensuring Scraps had water and more food, Nellie reluctantly left the barn. As she walked toward her house, she felt different somehow, less invisible, more purposeful. For the first time since losing her parents, she had something that needed her, something that made her feel truly important. In her room that night, Nellie filled page after page of her sketchbook with drawings of Scraps, trying to capture every unusual detail. Each sketch brought new questions about what exactly she had found, but one thing was certain: her life had changed forever in that moment behind the diner. Over the next few days, Nellie settled into a new routine. Every morning before school, she'd sneak out to the barn to check on Scraps, bringing fresh water and whatever food she could safely smuggle from the house. After school, she'd spend hours in the barn, sketching and watching as her unusual friend grew stronger. But the more time she spent with Scraps, the more she noticed things that didn't quite add up. When she brought leftover meatloaf one evening, Scraps turned away, showing interest only in the vegetables and bread. The creature remained eerily silent, too. No barks, no whimpers, not even a growl. Instead, those intelligent amber eyes would follow her every movement with an almost human-like attention. One particularly warm afternoon, Tully Carter showed up at the barn while she was sketching. His sudden appearance made her jump. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I was starting to think you'd fallen off the planet." "Tully, Nellie scrambled to block his view of Scraps, but it was too late. "What in the world is that?" Tully stepped closer, his scientific curiosity clearly piqued. "That's not a normal dog, Nellie. Look at those joint structures, and the skull shape is all wrong." "He's just different," Nellie said defensively, moving to stand between Tully and Scraps. "Maybe he's some kind of mixed breed." Tully shook his head, crouching down to get a better look. "Mixed with what? A kangaroo? Those back legs aren't built like any dog I've ever seen, and where's its fur?" "He was hurt when I found him," Nellie explained quickly. "He's still recovering." "Nellie, I'm serious. This isn't normal. Maybe we should tell someone." "No!" The force of her response surprised even her. "He's fine. He just needs time to heal." Tully gave her a long look, concern evident behind his glasses. Okay. But be careful, all right? Something's not right here." After Tully left, Nellie found herself studying Scraps more carefully. The creature had grown considerably in just a few days, its once skeletal frame filling out with lean muscle. Its movements were becoming more fluid, more graceful, almost dance-like at times. That night, unable to sleep, Nellie snuck out to the barn with her sketchbook and a flashlight. She found Scraps awake, standing in a shaft of moonlight. As she watched, something extraordinary happened. The creature slowly rose up on its hind legs, balancing perfectly upright for several seconds before dropping back to all fours. Nellie's pencil fell from her trembling fingers. That's impossible," she whispered. Scraps turned to look at her, those amber eyes reflecting the moonlight. There was something in that gaze, something that went beyond animal intelligence. Nellie backed away slowly, her mind struggling to process what she'd just seen. The next day, still shaken by the previous night's events, Nellie was sitting in the barn sketching when a movement caught her eye. A large snake had slithered in through a gap in the wooden walls. Its diamond-shaped head and distinctive markings identified it as venomous, one of the copperheads that sometimes showed up on their property. Before Nellie could react, Scraps moved. The creature launched itself across the barn in a single, impossible leap, covering nearly 20 feet. In one fluid motion, it caught the snake just behind its head and snapped its spine. The whole thing happened so fast that Nellie barely had time to gasp. With trembling hands, she opened her sketchbook and began drawing frantically, trying to capture the incredible scene she'd just witnessed. The way Scraps had moved, the impossible distance of that jump, the precise and deliberate way it had dispatched the snake. None of it fit with any animal she knew. That evening, after making sure Scraps was settled, Nellie sat at her computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a moment's hesitation, she typed cryptids into the search bar. As she scrolled through pages about legendary creatures and mysterious beings, a nagging feeling grew in her gut. None of the descriptions quite matched Scraps, but they all shared one common thread. They were things that weren't supposed to exist. She opened a new tab and started researching unusual animals, genetic mutations, and unexplained creatures. Hours passed as she fell deeper into her research, occasionally glancing at her sketches of Scraps for comparison. The more she learned, the more certain she became that whatever Scraps was, it wasn't anything that could be explained by normal means. Looking out her window at the dark shape of the barn, Nellie felt a mix of fear and protectiveness. Whatever Scraps might be, she had made a promise to keep it safe, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting involved in something much bigger and potentially more dangerous than she had initially realized. Nellie's fingers flew across her keyboard late into the night. The glow of the computer screen lit up her tired face as she scrolled through page after page of cryptozoology websites. Her sketchbook lay open beside her, filled with detailed drawings of Scraps' unusual features: the elongated limbs, the peculiar skull shape, those haunting amber eyes. "No way," she whispered, leaning closer to the screen. She'd stumbled onto an obscure forum discussing Appalachian folklore. There, in grainy black and white photographs from the 1950s, were creatures that looked eerily similar to Scraps. The posts referred to them as Krevlins, mysterious beings that supposedly appeared in remote mountain valleys. "The Krevlin is known for its ability to move with impossible grace," she read aloud softly. "Witnesses describe it as hairless, with disproportionately long limbs and intelligent eyes." Her heart raced as she compared the description to her sketches. A knock at her bedroom door made her jump. "Nellie?" her grandmother called. "You're up awfully late, dear. Everything okay?" "Just finishing some homework, Gran." Nellie quickly minimized the browser window. "Going to bed soon?" "Well, all right. But I've been meaning to ask, have you been going out to the barn at night? I've seen the lights on." Nellie's stomach tightened. "Sometimes I like to sketch out there. It's peaceful." There was a pause. "Just be careful, honey, and make sure you're locking up properly." The next morning at school, Tully cornered her by her locker. "Nellie, we need to talk about that thing in your barn." "Keep your voice down!" Nellie hissed, glancing around nervously. "I did some research," Tully continued, pushing his glasses up his nose. "There's no known species that matches what I saw. This could be dangerous. What if it's sick? Or what if it hurts someone?" "Scraps wouldn't hurt anyone," Nellie insisted. "You don't understand. He's special." "That's exactly what worries me," Tully said, his face serious. "Something that special probably belongs to someone who might be looking for it." As if summoned by Tully's words, everything changed that afternoon at the diner. Nellie was helping out after school, refilling salt shakers, when the bell above the door chimed. A man in an expensive black suit walked in, looking completely out of place among the regular customers in their work clothes and casual wear. He moved from table to table, showing something on his phone and asking questions. Nellie tried to appear busy while straining to hear his conversations. The words "unusual animal sightings" and "recent weeks" drifted over. When he reached the counter, Nellie got a better look at him. He was tall and lean, with perfectly styled gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. A silver pin on his lapel caught the light, a stylized double helix. Miles Hargrave, he introduced himself smoothly to the waitress. Helix Prime Biotech. We're conducting a survey of unusual wildlife activity in the area. Nellie's hands shook as she wiped down the counter, trying to appear casual while her mind raced. The man's presence felt wrong, like a shark gliding through peaceful waters. Just as she thought she might escape notice, those icy eyes locked onto her. "Excuse me, miss?" His voice was perfectly polite, but something in it made her skin crawl. "Might I have a moment of your time?" Nellie nodded reluctantly, unable to think of a way to refuse that wouldn't seem suspicious. "I understand you spend quite a bit of time around here," Hargrave said, pulling out his phone. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Any strange creatures, perhaps?" He showed her a photo that made her blood run cold. It was blurry, taken at night, but she recognized Scrap's distinctive silhouette. "No, sir," she managed to say, proud that her voice remained steady. "Just the usual. Deer, raccoons, that sort of thing." Hargrave studied her face for a long moment. "Are you quite sure?" "This is very important. The creature we're looking for is Helix Prime property. It's part of a very expensive research program, and it needs to be returned." "I haven't seen anything like that," Nellie insisted, her heart pounding. "Well," Hargrave said, sliding a business card across the counter, "if you do see anything, please contact me immediately, day or night." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "And Nellie? It would be best if you didn't mention our conversation to anyone, for everyone's safety." The fact that he knew her name without her telling him made Nellie's stomach lurch. She watched him leave, noting the black SUV with tinted windows parked outside. Only when he was gone did she realize she'd been gripping the counter so hard her knuckles had turned white. She looked down at the business card. Below the Helix Prime logo was a phone number and a simple message. "Doing what's right is always the safest choice." It wasn't just a reminder, Nellie realized. It was a threat. That night, Nellie couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, Hargrave's thinly veiled threat echoing in her mind. Around midnight, an acrid smell jolted her awake. Smoke. Her heart stopped as she saw an orange glow through her bedroom window. The barn was on fire. "No!" she screamed, scrambling out of bed and racing down the stairs in her pajamas. She burst out the back door, the heat hitting her face like a wall. Flames licked up the wooden walls of the old barn, spreading rapidly across the dry timber. "Scraps!" Nellie shouted, running toward the inferno. "Scraps!" Strong arms caught her from behind. Her grandmother, in her nightgown, held her back. "Nellie, no! It's too dangerous!" But then they both froze as something burst through the barn's upper window in a shower of glass. Scraps landed gracefully on all fours, his strange form illuminated by the flames. Without hesitation, he bounded into the darkness of the woods. Nellie watched him disappear as sirens wailed in the distance. Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief that Scraps was alive, but also tears of rage. This was no accident. This was Hargrave. The next morning, after the fire department had gone and her grandmother had finally fallen asleep, Nellie called Tully. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Meet me at the creek. Now I need to tell you everything." Tully arrived on his bike 20 minutes later, out of breath and worried. "Nellie, I heard about the fire. Are you okay?" "They tried to kill him, Tully." Nellie paced along the creek bank. "Helix Prime, they sent someone yesterday. When I wouldn't give Scraps up, they set the barn on fire." "Wait, what? Who's they? What are you talking about?" Nellie told him everything, about Hargrave's visit, the threats, and how Scraps had escaped. "And now I know why he's so different," she said, pulling out her phone. "Look what I found last night while I couldn't sleep." She showed Tully an old news article about Helix Prime Biotech. The company had faced allegations of illegal genetic research years ago, but the case had been quietly settled out of court. "There's more," she continued, scrolling through her phone. "There used to be a Helix Prime research facility in the hills, just past the old mining road. It was supposedly shut down 5 years ago." Tully's face went pale. "Nellie, this is serious. We need to tell someone, the police, or—" "Tell them what? That an evil corporation is after my weird pet that I've been hiding? They'll think we're crazy." She grabbed his arm. "But if we can find proof—" "No," Tully said firmly. "We need to run. Get Scraps somewhere safe." "Running won't stop them," Nellie insisted. "They'll just keep doing this to other creatures. We need evidence." They argued back and forth until a rustling in the bushes made them both jump. But it was just Scraps, emerging cautiously from his hiding place. Seeing him made Nellie's resolve stronger. "I'm going to that facility," she declared, "with or without you." Tully stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're insane." He pushed his glasses up. "But I'm not letting you go alone." They waited until dusk, then rode their bikes up the old mining road, Scraps following silently through the woods beside them. The abandoned Helix Prime facility loomed ahead, a concrete building half hidden by overgrown vegetation, its windows dark and empty. "This is a terrible idea," Tully whispered as they found a broken window at ground level. Inside, their flashlight beams revealed dusty corridors and empty offices. But in a basement storage room, they struck gold. Boxes of old files and photographs that hadn't been properly cleared out. Nellie's hands trembled as she opened a folder labeled Project Chimera. Inside were photos that made her gasp. Creatures like Scraps, but different, some more aggressive-looking, some clearly failed experiments. Notes detailed genetic splicing, behavior modification, combat training. "Look at this," Tully said, his voice hollow. He held up a document detailing underground fighting events where wealthy clients could bet on battles between genetic hybrids. Profit projections ran into the millions. Scraps whimpered softly, pressing against Nellie's leg. She knelt beside him, seeing him with new eyes. He had been created for violence, bred to fight for the entertainment of the rich. But somewhere along the way, something had gone wrong, or rather, right. He had developed beyond their control, become something more than a weapon. "We need to get pictures of all of this," Nellie said, pulling out her phone. "Everything we can—" A sudden noise upstairs made them all freeze. Footsteps. Flashlight beams bounced off the walls of the stairwell. "Someone's here," Tully whispered urgently. "We need to go, now!" The beam of Nellie's flashlight trembled across the dusty files. Her heart pounded as she opened another folder, this one marked Subject Behavioral Analysis. Inside, clinical notes and photographs documented Scrap's early life in sterile laboratory conditions. "Listen to this," she whispered to Tully, who was keeping watch by the door. Subject 17 displays concerning lack of aggressive response. Multiple stimulus tests failed to provoke combat engagement. She flipped through more pages. "They tried everything to make him fight, but he wouldn't." Tully limped over, his curiosity overtaking his caution. "What do you mean?" "Look here," Nellie pointed to a series of photographs showing a younger Scraps in various testing scenarios. They put him in with other hybrids, tried to provoke him with pain and fear, but instead of attacking, her voice caught as she read the next line. Subject repeatedly attempts to form social bonds with handlers and other test subjects. Displays unprecedented levels of empathy and emotional intelligence. Scraps whimpered softly, pressing his head against her leg. Nellie knelt beside him, running her fingers through his sparse fur. "That's why they threw you away, isn't it? You weren't broken. You were just too good." "Nellie," Tully's voice was urgent. "There's more. These aren't just experiments. They're running some kind of underground fighting ring. Rich people betting on hybrid battles like it's a twisted sport?" Before Nellie could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from above. They all froze. More footsteps joined the first set, moving with purpose. "We need to go," Tully hissed, grabbing Nellie's arm. "Now!" Nellie hastily shoved the most damning files into her backpack. They crept toward the exit, Scraps moving silently beside them. The basement had 2 staircases, one at each end. They headed for the far one, away from the sounds above. They were halfway up the stairs when a beam of light cut through the darkness. "Stop right there," a harsh voice commanded. Tully shoved Nellie behind him as 2 men in tactical gear appeared at the top of the stairs. More footsteps thundered down the other staircase. They were trapped. "Hand over the creature," one of the men ordered, training his flashlight on Scraps. "Do it now and nobody gets hurt." "No." Nellie tried to move forward, but Tully held her back. "Run," he whispered. Then, before she could stop him, he charged up the stairs at the guards. Everything happened at once. Tully collided with the first guard, sending them both sprawling. The second guard reached for something at his belt. Scraps leaped forward with incredible speed, knocking Nellie backward down the stairs just as a dart whistled through the space where she had been standing. She landed hard at the bottom, her backpack cushioning her fall. More guards were closing in. Through tears, she saw Tully struggling with the first guard until the man slammed him against the wall. Tully crumpled to the ground, motionless. "Tully!" she screamed. Scraps stood between her and the approaching guards, his hackles raised. But before he could move, 2 darts struck his flank. He staggered, fighting the sedative, his eyes locked on Nellie's. "Go," she could have sworn she heard him say, though she knew it was impossible. Then his legs gave out and he collapsed. "Get the girl!" someone shouted. Nellie scrambled to her feet and ran. She could hear them behind her, but she knew this basement better now, knew where the old coal chute was. She squeezed through the narrow opening, ignoring the scrapes and cuts as she pulled herself up into the cold night air. She ran until her lungs burned, until she couldn't run anymore. When she finally stopped, she was alone in the woods, clutching her backpack full of stolen files. She had evidence now, proof of everything Helix Prime had done. But the cost? Tears streamed down her face as she thought of Tully lying unconscious on those stairs, of Scraps being taken back to the people who had thrown him away for being too kind. She had lost them both. The walk home was endless. Every shadow made her jump. Every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. When she finally reached her grandmother's house, she slipped in through her window and collapsed on her bed, still holding the backpack. For a long time, she just lay there, staring at nothing. The weight of everything that had happened crushed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. She had wanted to save Scraps, to expose the truth. Instead, she had lost her best friend and the creature who had become family to her. But in her backpack, she had proof. Evidence of their crimes, their cruelty, their underground fighting rings. She had the truth. But was it worth the price she had paid? As dawn began to creep through her window, Nellie curled around her backpack and finally let herself cry. Deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She had never felt more alone. Nellie sat in her bedroom, surrounded by scattered sketches of Scraps. 3 days had passed since that terrible night at the abandoned lab. Her grandmother thought she had the flu. It was easier than explaining why she couldn't stop crying or eat more than a few bites at meals. Tully was still unconscious in the hospital. The doctors called it a severe concussion, but Nellie knew who was really responsible. She visited him yesterday, sitting beside his bed while his father dozed in a chair nearby. The guilt ate at her every time she looked at his pale face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, touching one of her drawings. It showed Scraps the way she'd first found him, small, scared, hidden under that dumpster. Another sketch captured him standing upright, his strange grace evident even in pencil strokes. Her latest drawings were different, showing his eyes, the intelligence that had drawn her to him from the start. She flipped through her sketchbook, pausing at the margins where she often scribbled notes and symbols. Something caught her eye. There, beside a drawing of Scraps sleeping, were odd marks in the dirt she'd captured, marks she'd dismissed as random paw prints. Nellie sat up straighter, heart pounding. She grabbed another sketch, then another. The same patterns appeared, scratched into the barn floor, drawn in spilled feed. They weren't random at all. They matched her own notations, simple shapes and arrows she used to remind herself of lighting and perspective. "Oh my God," she breathed. Scraps hadn't just been making marks. He'd been copying her, learning, communicating. Her hands shook as she spread out more drawings. How had she missed it? The way he studied her sketchbook, how he'd drag his paw through dirt in similar patterns. He wasn't just intelligent. He understood symbols, language, meaning. Nellie grabbed her laptop, fingers flying over the keys. She remembered reading about Patricia Kane, a journalist who'd exposed illegal animal testing at a pharmaceutical company last year. Kane's articles had shut down the entire operation. She found Kane's contact information and typed out an email, then deleted it. Started again. How could she explain this without sounding crazy? Finally, she settled for the truth. "Dear Ms. Kane, I have evidence of illegal genetic experiments being conducted by Helix Prime Biotech. They're creating hybrid creatures for underground fighting rings. I have files, photos, and documentation. But more importantly, I have proof that at least one of their creatures has developed the ability to understand and replicate human symbols. Please help me expose what they're doing." She attached photos of the files they'd stolen and her most compelling sketches, then hit send before she could change her mind. Her heart raced as she waited, checking her inbox every few minutes. 2 hours later, her phone rang. An unknown number. "Nellie?" A woman's voice, sharp and professional. "This is Patricia Kane. I need you to tell me everything." Nellie talked until her throat was dry, explaining how she'd found Scraps, what they'd discovered at the lab, how Tully had been hurt. Kane listened without interrupting, only asking occasional clarifying questions. "The files are concerning enough," Kane said when Nellie finished. "But if you're right about this creature's ability to understand and reproduce symbolic language, that's not just intelligence, that's evidence of sentience, of consciousness." "What does that mean?" Nellie asked. "It means Helix Prime isn't just conducting illegal experiments or running underground fights. They're essentially imprisoning and torturing sentient beings. That's a whole different level of criminal activity." Kane paused. "Can you meet me tomorrow? Bring everything you have, files, sketches, all of it." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over. As Nellie hung up, she felt something she hadn't since that night at the lab. Hope. She looked at her latest sketch of Scraps, his eyes so full of understanding, of connection. She'd thought she was saving him that day behind the diner, but maybe he'd been waiting for someone who would see him for what he really was. Not a failed experiment or a fighting machine, but a being capable of thought, of learning, of love. "I'm coming for you," she promised the drawing. "Just hold on a little longer." She gathered her sketches and the files, organizing everything for tomorrow's meeting. For the first time in 3 days, she felt her determination returning. Helix Prime had taken Scraps and hurt Tully, thinking they could scare her into silence. Instead, they'd given her the key to bringing their whole operation down. Patricia Kane adjusted Nellie's borrowed lab coat, tucking a loose strand of auburn hair under the young intern's cap. "Remember, walk like you belong here. No one questions people who look confident." Nellie nodded, her heart thundering against her ribs. The security badge clipped to her chest felt heavy, a forgery provided by one of Kane's sources. Through the facility's chain-link fence, she could see the stark white building where Helix Prime kept their failed specimens. 48 hours, Kane muttered, checking her watch. That's all we have before they incinerate everything inside. From his position in the nearby van, Tully worked on his laptop. His arm was still in a sling, but his fingers flew across the keyboard. "Security feeds are looped. You'll have 20 minutes before they notice. Nellie touched the small radio in her ear. You sure you're okay to do this? Hey, all I have to do is hit a few buttons and create chaos in their system, Tully said, trying to sound light despite the worry in his voice. You're the one walking into the lion's den. They approached the entrance, matching their pace to the other employees arriving for the evening shift. Kane flashed her badge first, doctor's credentials, another forgery. Nellie held her breath as she followed, but the guard barely glanced at her intern badge before waving them through. Inside, the facility smelled of antiseptic and something else, something animal and afraid. Nellie's hands trembled as she followed Kane down sterile corridors, past rooms filled with cages and monitoring equipment. Section C, Kane whispered, checking a stolen floor plan. That's where they keep the specimens marked for disposal. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a man in a white coat. Nellie's heart stopped, but Kane smoothly stepped forward. Dr. Harrison asked us to check the vitals on the disposal specimens, Kane said, flashing her badge. Something about ensuring proper documentation before tomorrow's procedure. The man frowned but nodded. Just be quick about it. We're shutting down that wing at midnight. As soon as he was gone, Nellie released her breath. That was close. Tully, Kane spoke into her radio. We need that diversion now. On it, came his reply. 3, 2, 1. Alarms began blaring in a distant part of the building. Red lights flashed. Over the intercom, a voice announced, Security breach in Laboratory Wing B. All personnel report to emergency stations. They hurried down the now empty corridor until they reached Section C. The room was dimly lit, filled with rows of cages. Most were empty, but in the back... Scraps, Nellie whispered. He lay curled in a corner, his unique form unmistakable even in the shadows. He didn't move when she approached, didn't even lift his head. He's sedated, Kane said, checking the chart on his cage. Heavy doses. They didn't want to risk any incidents before disposal. Nellie's fingers shook as she worked the cage lock with a stolen keycard. Scraps? It's me. Please, wake up. His amber eyes flickered open, unfocused and dull. She reached for him, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let them take you. Nellie, Kane warned, we have 10 minutes left. But Nellie couldn't leave him like this. She stroked his elongated face, remembering how he'd stood upright in her barn, how he'd protected her from the snake. Please, you have to wake up. We have to go. Scraps blinked slowly. His claw moved against the cage floor, dragging through the dust. Nellie gasped as she recognized what he was drawing, the simple arrow symbol she used in her sketches to show movement and direction. Kane, she called out. Look, he remembers. He's trying to communicate. The journalist hurried over, filming with her phone. This is incredible. Even heavily sedated, he's displaying clear symbolic thinking. Scraps drew another symbol, the circle Nellie used to mark important details in her sketches. His movements were sluggish, but deliberate. Good boy, Nellie whispered. That's it. Wake up. Come back to me. The alarms suddenly changed pitch. Tully's voice crackled in their earpieces. They're starting to figure out the security feed loop. You need to move. Now. Kane helped Nellie lift Scraps from the cage. He was heavier than before, but his legs were starting to move as the sedation slowly wore off. Which way? Nellie asked, supporting Scraps' weight. Service elevator, Kane replied. Tully's got it ready for us. They half-carried, half-dragged Scraps down the corridor. Behind them, voices approached, sharp, urgent voices giving orders. Scraps' head lifted slightly, his eyes focusing more with each step. Come on, Nellie urged him. Just a little further. You can do it. His legs steadied. By the time they reached the service elevator, he was almost standing on his own. Kane jabbed the down button repeatedly while Nellie kept watching the corridor. 30 seconds, Tully warned through the radio. That's all I can give you. The elevator dinged. They stumbled inside just as shouts erupted behind them. The last thing Nellie saw before the doors closed was Scraps drawing another symbol in the dust on the elevator floor, her symbol for home. The elevator doors opened to the parking garage level, and Nellie's heart leaped with hope. Freedom was just ahead, but that hope shattered instantly. Miles Hargrave stood waiting, his tall frame blocking their path. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he leveled a black handgun at them. I have to admit, Miss Granger, you've been remarkably persistent. His voice echoed through the concrete structure. But this ends now. Kane stepped forward, her phone still recording. Put the gun down, Hargrave. You're already exposed. Exposed? He laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Do you have any idea how much money is invested in this program? How many powerful people have a stake in keeping it quiet? Scraps was fully alert now, his amber eyes fixed on the weapon. Nellie could feel him tensing beside her. He's not just some experiment, Nellie said, her voice stronger than she felt. He thinks, he feels, he understands. It's a mistake of science, Miles spat. A failed prototype that refused its purpose. Do you know how many millions we wasted trying to make it aggressive? And instead it wanted to draw pictures and play fetch. That's exactly what makes him special, Nellie argued. He chose compassion over violence. He proved he's more than just your weapon. Miles' finger tightened on the trigger. Special? It's an aberration, and you're a foolish girl who's gotten in way over her head. The gunshot cracked through the garage like thunder. Nellie barely had time to register what was happening before Scraps launched himself forward with impossible speed. His body slammed into her, knocking her aside as the bullet meant for her chest tore into his shoulder instead. No! Nellie screamed as Scraps collapsed, dark blood spreading across the concrete. Drop the gun! Tully's voice rang out. He and two security guards burst through the stairwell door, weapons drawn. It's over, Hargrave. The journalist held up her phone. We've been broadcasting everything. Your entire operation is live on social media right now, and that's not all. More security personnel entered, led by a woman in a business suit. Miles Hargrave, she announced. I'm Agent Cooper, FBI. We've been building a case against Helix Prime for months. The security footage your people just sent us is the final evidence we needed. Miles' composure cracked. You don't understand. The potential applications include illegal genetic experimentation, animal cruelty, and attempted murder. Agent Cooper cut him off. Drop the weapon. For a terrible moment, Miles looked like he might shoot anyway. Then his shoulders slumped, and the gun clattered to the floor. As agents moved to arrest him, Nellie crawled to Scraps' side. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were clear and fixed on her face. His claw moved weakly, drawing their shared symbol for safety in the dust. Stay with me, Nellie pleaded, pressing her hands against his wound. Please, you saved my life. Tully knelt beside them, shrugging off his jacket to help stop the bleeding. Medics are on their way. And Nellie? Look. She followed his gaze to where Kane was showing her phone to the FBI agents. On the screen, clear as day, was footage of Scraps drawing symbols, demonstrating not just intelligence, but understanding. Combined with the security footage of him taking the bullet to protect her, there could be no more doubt about his sentience. He's going to need surgery, a paramedic said, joining them with a medical kit. But the wound isn't fatal. We'll take good care of him. Nellie held Scraps' face between her hands, tears falling freely now. You're going to be okay. We did it. We exposed them. You're free now. His tail thumped once against the floor, their old signal for happiness, before his eyes drifted closed as the paramedics began their work. Agent Cooper approached, her expression softened. Miss Granger? We'll need your statement, but first I want you to know, what you've done here today is extraordinary. You've not only exposed a major criminal operation, but also helped establish legal precedent for the rights of genetically engineered beings. Your friend here has changed everything." Nellie watched as they carefully lifted Scraps onto a stretcher. His chest rose and fell steadily, and his claw still held traces of the symbols he'd drawn, proof of his intelligence, his choice to protect rather than harm, his capacity for love. Miles Hargrave was led past in handcuffs, his corporate empire crumbling around him. Other Helix Prime executives were being arrested throughout the building. Kane was already speaking with major news networks, the story spreading faster than any cover-up could contain it. "Stay with him," Tully told Nellie, squeezing her shoulder. "I'll handle things here." Nellie nodded, following the paramedics as they wheeled Scraps toward the waiting ambulance. His blood-matted fur couldn't hide the graceful lines she'd spent so many hours sketching. He wasn't a mistake. He was a miracle, one that had chosen her, trusted her, and now saved her life. The veterinary team worked through the night to stabilize Scraps. Nellie stayed at the hospital, her sketchbook open on her lap, drawing the same safety symbol over and over. Tully brought her coffee and stayed beside her, his presence a quiet comfort in the sterile waiting room. When dawn broke, the lead surgeon emerged with good news. The bullet missed any vital organs. He's going to make a full recovery. 2 weeks later, Nellie watched as Scraps explored his new home at the Protected Species Sanctuary. The sprawling enclosure stretched across 5 acres of woodland, complete with a heated indoor shelter and a spring-fed pond. Scraps moved with his characteristic grace, investigating every corner of his territory. "He's adapting well," Dr. Martinez, the sanctuary's director, said. "We've never housed anything quite like him, but he's gentle with the staff and shows remarkable intelligence." Nellie smiled as Scraps paused to scratch symbols in the dirt, the same ones she'd taught him from her sketchbook. He understands more than most people realize. The federal investigation into Helix Prime Biotech moved swiftly. Nellie found herself in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional committee. Her voice shook at first as she described finding Scraps, but grew stronger as she detailed the company's crimes. "They created him to be violent," she told the packed chamber, her sketches displayed on screens behind her. "But he chose compassion instead. They called him a failure because he wouldn't fight, but his ability to love and protect others proves he's more evolved than they ever intended." The evidence was overwhelming. Files detailing illegal genetic experiments, security footage of underground fighting rings, and financial records of massive betting operations led to indictments against 23 Helix Prime executives. Miles Hargrave faced additional charges of attempted murder. News outlets ran constant coverage of the scandal. Nellie's sketches of Scraps appeared in magazines and newspapers worldwide. Scientists and ethicists debated the implications of his demonstrated sentience. Animal rights groups called for new laws protecting genetic hybrids. Through it all, Nellie kept a low profile in Breckland. She returned to school, where other students whispered and pointed, but she found she didn't mind anymore. She had bigger things to think about. One autumn afternoon, she sat with Tully on his father's garage roof, their old hiding spot. The air was crisp, and fallen leaves skittered across the parking lot below. "Your latest sketch was in National Geographic," Tully said, nudging her shoulder. "The one of Scraps protecting that rabbit in his enclosure?" Nellie nodded. "They're doing a whole series on genetic engineering ethics. The sanctuary gets donation requests every day now." "You changed everything, you know." Tully's voice was soft. "Not just for Scraps, but for however many others are out there like him." "We changed everything," Nellie corrected him. "I couldn't have done it without you." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Tully reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. No words were needed. They'd known each other too long for that. The next day, Nellie visited Scraps at the sanctuary. He bounded over as soon as he saw her, moving with the fluid grace that still took her breath away. His wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar partially hidden by his unusual fur. She sat cross-legged in the grass while he drew symbols in the dirt. Safety, friend, happy. His vocabulary grew every week, and researchers came from around the world to study his communication abilities. "Look what I brought," Nellie said, pulling out her sketchbook. She flipped it open to a fresh page and began to draw. Scraps watched intently, then used his claw to copy her new symbol. Dr. Martinez, observing from nearby, made notes on her tablet. "His comprehension is remarkable. He's not just mimicking, he understands the meanings and uses them in context." Nellie scratched behind Scrap's ears, exactly where he liked it. His eyes, still that striking amber, held the same intelligence and warmth that had first drawn her to him behind the diner so many months ago. "The legal team says he's set a precedent," Dr. Martinez continued. "No court can deny his sentience now. It's changing how we think about consciousness, about what makes someone a person." Scraps drew another symbol, the one for love, and pressed his head against Nellie's knee. She hugged him, breathing in his familiar scent. "You were always a person to me," she whispered. "Right from the start." 6 months after the Helix Prime scandal, Nellie stood in the Breckland Community Center's gallery space, surrounded by her sketches. Each drawing told part of her journey with Scraps, from the first rough sketch behind the diner to detailed studies of his unique features and expressions. She'd arranged them chronologically, letting visitors follow their story from beginning to present. "The shading here is amazing," said Emma, a 13-year-old aspiring artist who attended Nellie's weekly mentoring sessions. "How did you capture the texture of his fur?" Nellie demonstrated the technique in her teaching sketchbook, showing how layered strokes could create depth. "It's about patience," she explained, "looking closely at what's really there, not what you expect to see." Other students gathered around, asking questions about perspective and proportion. Nellie answered each one carefully, remembering how isolated she'd felt at their age. Now, sharing her art gave her purpose beyond the whistleblower headlines. The exhibition, titled More Than Human, would open to the public tomorrow evening. Already, media outlets were calling it groundbreaking, not just for the artistic merit, but for how it challenged perceptions of consciousness and connection. "Miss Granger?" A small voice pulled her attention to Katie, her shyest student. "Is it true that Scraps can write?" Nellie smiled, leading the group to a special display case. Inside lay her original sketchbook, open to pages where Scraps had scratched his first symbols. "He doesn't just write, he communicates. He understands meanings and chooses which symbols express what he wants to say." The students pressed closer, fascinated by the evidence of Scraps' intelligence. Nellie remembered her own amazement when she'd first realized what he was capable of. Now, researchers studied his language development while artists and philosophers debated the implications of his existence. After the mentoring session ended, Nellie drove to the sanctuary. The autumn air was crisp, leaves dancing across the parking lot as she walked toward the trail. The facility had expanded thanks to donations and government funding, now housing other rescued genetic experiments. But Scraps had his own special enclosure, more of a protected habitat than a cage. He appeared before she reached the gate, moving with that fluid grace that still took her breath away. His amber eyes lit up with recognition, and he immediately began scratching in the dirt. The symbol for friend emerged, clear and deliberate. "Hey, buddy," Nellie said softly. "I brought you something." She pulled out her latest sketchbook, showing him a drawing of the exhibition space with his portraits on display. He studied it intently, then added the symbol for proud beside his greeting. "I thought I'd find you here," came Tully's voice from behind her. He walked up, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this after the mentoring session." Nellie accepted the cup gratefully, their fingers brushing. So much had changed, but Tully remained her constant, the one who'd believed in her from the start. He'd been there through the congressional hearings, the media frenzy, and the quiet moments of doubt. They walked the sanctuary trail together, hands clasped loosely between them. No words were needed. They'd moved beyond that kind of uncertainty. Through the trees, they could see Scraps following their progress, respectfully distant, but present. "The exhibition looks amazing," Tully said finally. "Your students are lucky to have you." Nellie squeezed his hand. "I never thought I'd be here, you know? Teaching art, preparing for a gallery opening. Sometimes it feels like a dream." "You always had it in you," Tully replied. "You just needed the right catalyst." They paused at a viewing point overlooking the valley. Scraps settled into a patch of sunlight nearby, not approaching but maintaining his connection through presence alone. He wasn't a pet, had never been one. He was a being who had chosen Nellie just as surely as she had chosen him. The symbol he scratched in the earth before heading back into his territory combined friend with forever. Nellie touched the marks gently, remembering the scared, isolated girl she'd been when she first found him behind that diner. Now, standing between the two beings who had helped her find her voice, one human, one decidedly not, she felt complete. The late afternoon sun painted everything in gold, and somewhere in the distance, a bell rang at the sanctuary's main building. But for now, they stayed in this moment. Nellie, once invisible, now transformed into someone who had made a real difference in the world, her bond with both Scraps and Tully fully realized at last. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.